This meeting is being recorded.
So, shalom and welcome. Shalom and welcome, my friends. On behalf of my colleagues at Jewish Initiative for Animals and Jewish Veg, I want to thank you all so much for being here today. I am Rabbi Jonathan Jaffe Bernhard. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am delighted to welcome you today in honor of Aleph Be'elul, the first day or Aleph of the Hebrew month of Elul, also known as the Jewish New Year for animals. Now, for many of us in the Jewish community, this is a particularly difficult time to find room for celebration. And it is a hallmark of Judaism to hold multiple, often conflicting feelings about the world and what's happening within it. So however you're arriving to this space, please take care of your needs. Please be mindful of how others may be arriving, and let us all bring forth compassion and hope for a better world. Now, our program today will last 90 minutes. You can continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. And so you know, the program will be recorded and all the registrants will receive a link of the recording afterwards via email. When you sign out of the program, whether at the end or in the middle, you will be prompted to fill out a short survey, and we encourage you to complete it. Even if you can't stay for the full time, we really greatly appreciate your feedback. And I want to thank our captioners, Sarah and Rocky, for being with us today to help make this program as accessible as we possibly can. To enable the live captions on your computer, simply click on the Show Captions or the CC button on your Zoom dashboard. Now, a month from now, Jewish communities around the world will be celebrating the high holidays. And these weeks leading up to Rosh Hashanah are known as a time for deep introspection and reflection so that we can be in better relationship with ourselves and with one another. Our commitment to making our Jewish and human communities stronger must include a broader commitment to the living world. And that's why we're here. We're here to acknowledge, to celebrate, and to transform those relationships. We can acknowledge our relationship with the living by recognizing the ways in which other creatures' welfare is inextricably linked to our own as humans. We can celebrate our communal relationship with animals by embracing them as members of our community and doing our best to understand their communities, which Professor Berkowitz will be teaching more on later. When we truly understand this interconnection, we can connect the dots between industrialized animal agriculture and pressing issues like worker justice, environmental protection, and pandemic risk, all of which link back to the welfare of farmed animals. We can transform our relationship with animals primarily through the thing that is core to us as a people and that is typically central to our Jewish celebrations, through food. Now, our organizational work is focused on taking action first and foremost by implementing more sustainable food practices, be it with the institutional policies or with individuals. Few people have been champions of raising awareness and mobilizing the Jewish community to action on this issue, on this particular issue, more than Professor Richard Schwartz, whom we want to honor and acknowledge today. Now, starting in 1975, when a class that he taught called Mathematics and the Environment opened his eyes to a reality that would take others decades to see, Richard has been living and preaching the word. He went vegetarian in 1977, he went vegan in 2000, and he has been active in numerous vegetarian and animal rights organizations, including being involved in the founding of Jewish Vegetarians of North America, which would eventually become Jewish Veg. Richard has written numerous books and countless articles reflecting his knowledge, commitment, and passion. And it is a pleasure to thank him, to acknowledge him, and to give him a little space so that we can hear today from Professor Richard Schwartz.
Okay, many thanks for the very kind introduction. I'm filled with much gratitude for this great honor. I want to first thank God for providing me with many blessings by reciting the traditional blessing and reaching a milestone in one's life. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'higiyanu b'zman hazeh. I want to very much thank the boards of Jewish Veg and Jewish Initiative for Animals for granting me this honor. Also want to thank all the vegan, vegetarian, animal rights, and environmental activists who have supported and encouraged me over my 50 years of activism. I want to thank my beloved wife, Loretta, for love, support, and encouragement over what will be 65 years of marriage, God willing, next February. And I want to thank my wonderful children, Susan, David, and Deborah, also for their love, support, and encouragement, and especially helping Loretta and me make Aliyah 8 years ago. Through them, Loretta and I have been blessed with 10 wonderful grandchildren and 8 wonderful great-grandchildren. My vegan journey started in the mid-1970s when I taught mathematics at the College of Staten Island to motivate liberal arts and science students who had to take a math course to meet a degree requirement by creating a unique course, Mathematics and the Environment. And I tried to tie the course into current issues. And one semester, we considered world hunger. And learning about the millions dying annually from hunger and its effects, I initially thought the world just could not produce enough food. Then I read a wonderful book by Francis Moore-Pay called Diet for a Small Planet, which pointed out the wastefulness of animal-based diets, with, for example, 70% of the grain produced in the world, grown in the United States, being fed to farmed animals. This inspired me to become a vegetarian in 1978. I then looked into other reasons for being a vegetarian and connections to Judaism. I came to believe that religion with such powerful teachings about compassion for animals, preserving health, feeding the hungry, helping the poor, and conserving resources must be consistent with vegetarianism. As I probed for appropriate Jewish teachings and concepts, I became increasingly convinced that one should be a vegetarian to be more completely involved with Judaism's glorious goals and values. I felt it urgent to spread this message, and though Judaism and Vegetarianism was published in 1982, later editions were published in 1988 and 2001. The book stresses that animal-based diets seriously violate basic Jewish teachings on preserving our health, treating animals with compassion, protecting the environment, conserving natural resources, reducing hunger, and pursuing peace. After learning how horribly dairy cows and egg-laying hens are treated, I became a vegan in 2000. My book, Vegan Revolution, Saving a World Revitalizing Judaism, published in 2020. Promoting plant-based diets has become a major part of my life. As indicated in the very kind introduction, I have been blessed with being able to do much to promote vegetarianism, veganism, animal rights, environmental sustainability, and related causes. and for that I am very, very grateful. Much of my focus recently has been working to increase awareness that the world is rapidly approaching a climate catastrophe, and that major shifts away from animal-based diets are essential to efforts to avert it. The world rapidly warming up 2024, if I could pass 2023 as the hottest year in recorded history. There's been a significant increase in the frequency and severity of heat waves, droughts, wildfires, storms, and floods. Climate experts warn that the world may soon reach a tipping point when climate spins out of control with disastrous consequences. To just have a chance to avert a climate catastrophe, animal-based agriculture, the leading cause of climate change, must be sharply reduced for two essential reasons. First, cows and other ruminants emit methane, a greenhouse gas over 80 times as potent per unit weight as carbon dioxide in heating the atmosphere. Second, 43% of the world's ice-free land now used for grazing and growing feed crops for animals. Much of these lands must be reforested. The additional trees would sequester much atmospheric carbon dioxide, reducing it from its current very, very dangerous level to a much safer one, potentially leaving a habitable, healthy, environmentally sustainable world for future generations. The above messages must be widely spread that help provide a decent world for future generations. This doom event to restore the ancient New Year for animals is value in that effort. Please join me in promoting plant-based diets, including providing financial support to Jewish Veg and the Jewish Institute for Animals. This is the most important thing that we can do for future generations to help provide a better world for future generations. There is no planet B. Thank you.
Richard, thank you. Thank you so much for your words. So appreciate what you said. By the way, I just also want to ask one favor before I continue. Richard, could you just either stand up for a sec or lower your camera so everyone can see what's on your sweatshirt?
Oh, okay. Let's see.
Is another Israeli American still being held?
Yeah. So, folks,
No,
Richard not only preaches the word, but he wears the word. Richard, thank you so much. You can move your camera back.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those wonderful words. Thank you for the dedication to building a more just and resilient food system, beginning with the Jewish community and the calls to action that are rooted in our Jewish values. Thank you for being willing to be out there and be among the first to be preaching this, to be talking about this, to be raising awareness about these issues. You've done so much, and we are so grateful. And the fact that you do this work, as you say, feeling blessed and are grateful is an even more powerful example for us for how we can carry ourselves through with this work as well. May we all feel as blessed and as grateful as you. Now, you and other champions of this movement have laid a foundation upon which our team has built. And so we are excited to announce the evolution of our organizations, the Jewish Initiative for Animals and Jewish Veg, into one cohesive team. So for the first time ever, we are thrilled to finally announce that Jewish Initiative for Animals and Jewish Veg will now merge and become the Center for Jewish Food Ethics. You would all be sending up a lot more of those celebration emojis if you knew how long it took us to come up with that name. We know that by combining our efforts and our work, we will be able to make an even larger impact on the Jewish community, on Jewish institutions and their food policies, and on supporting individuals in their journey as well. We are so thankful that you're all here with us today to hear our exciting announcement and to celebrate this with us. And our work will continue to be guided by the principles of Jewish wisdom and the urgent need for a more humane and sustainable food system. By fostering awareness, offering practical strategies, and creating spaces for dialogue, we are looking to make a lasting, positive impact on how Jewish communities source and serve food. And we're helping to build a food system that is good for all. Now, before I introduce our main program today, I'd like to share with you a brief trailer of a longer video that's going to be coming out in the fall entitled Shalom Begins on Your Plate. In it, you will hear from prominent Jewish leaders who are calling upon communities to adopt sustainable practices, food practices, not just as a matter of urgent concern, but as a way of honoring the sanctity of our fellow creatures with whom we share the bounty of Ma'aseh Breshit, of the works of all of creation.
We do not have your sound.
After the 6 days of creation, God took the hands of Adam and walked Adam all through the Garden of Eden and showed Adam all of the abundance, the incredible beauty of this magnificent creation, the fruits and the vegetables and the trees and the mountain vistas and presumably the sunset. And God said to Adam, all of this is for you. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that the way that we live in this world is properly stewarding the incredible blessings and the gifts that God has given us.
The livestock industry consumes fresh water supplies, and its spread leads to deforestation, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. All of these things go to how we are taking care of our environment, how we're taking care of animals. I think it's a sign that we need to do a better job of maybe going back to the basics and treat animals with respect, treat ourselves with respect. Between oat milk and almond milk, which should I drink?
Neither. It's a protein drink. You've got almond butter.
So sorry for the slight technical difficulties we had in the trailer, but hopefully gave you at least a little taste of the longer video that we will be sharing in Sukkot. Now, this trailer can be found on our YouTube channel and our new website, jewishfoodethics.org. And the full video, as I said, will be premiering just before Sukkot in a few weeks. We'd appreciate your sharing the trailer, by the way, with Jewish leaders in your community, and we hope you'll learn more about the Center of Jewish Food Ethics and support us in a variety of ways as we embark on this exciting new chapter. And now, I'd like to be able to introduce our main speaker for today, Professor Beth Berkowitz. I cannot think of a better person to help us celebrate this particular holiday with her presentation, Making Animals a Part of the Jewish Family. Beth Berkowitz is the Renert Chair of Jewish Studies and Professor of Religion at Barnard College. She is the author of Execution and Invention, Death Penalty Discourse in Early Rabbinic and Christian Cultures, From Antiquity to the Present, or Defining Jewish Difference from Antiquity to the Present, and Animals and Animality in Babylonian Talmud. Her area of academic specialization is classic rabbinic literature, and her interests include critical animal studies, Jewish difference, and biblical reception history. During Beth's presentation, the chat will be open, so please share your written questions in the chat. And Beth will do her best to address as many of those questions as possible at the end during the Q&A. Beth, it is a pleasure to be able to share this space with you. We welcome you, and we turn things over to you now.
Thanks so much. I was just looking at the chat too. Okay. Happy Jewish New Year for animals to everyone who's attending. I want to say Mazel Tov to Dr. Schwartz, who's such a visionary in this area. It's such an honor to be appearing with him. And thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, for your introduction. As Jonathan said, I'm a Jewish studies professor at Barnard College. The academic year just started yesterday. And as you know, it's a tumultuous time on college campuses. Certainly Barnard is one of them. So it's really a great pleasure to be celebrating with you today, the Jewish New Year for animals. And it would be a little too hard to get my dog Bert to come say hi and celebrate with us, but he's downstairs celebrating in spirit. And also, I just want to add, really excited to be part of this launch of this new organization with this new name, and it feels like a historic moment. So we already discussed some of the great reasons to reduce the consumption of animals. I'm going to share screen and use a PowerPoint. So let me just get that going for you. Okay. So there's so many things one could talk about with animal agricultural being energy intensive and deforestation and problems of biodiversity and the methane that goes into the atmosphere. So you could look at over here, the ways plant-based diets are nutritious and good for us and make people even feel better, and the problems with eating meat. And then that's not even to get into all the problems of animal welfare. But what I want to do, my goal with you today, is to put another reason on this list of great reasons that I think has been missing from the conversation. So I want to fix that. The missing piece of the conversation I want to suggest to you is family. I want to restore family to our conversations about animals. So in short, my proposal to you today, the takeaway from today, is that I really think family has the power to change the way we relate to animals. And if you were listening carefully, you'll notice that what I said is that family should be restored to Jewish conversations about animals. And the reason I use the word restore is because if you go back to the Torah, you will find that in the Torah, animal families were in fact a concern. They were part of the Jewish conversation. I want to discuss with you today some material in the Torah that deals with animal families. So the next obvious question you may be thinking is, what happened if animal families are an explicit concern in the Torah? Why are they not really on the Jewish radar any longer? And what I'm going to present to you today is that the rabbinic tradition, I think in certain ways, caused us to forget animal families. But at the same time, what I want to suggest is that I think there are other streams within the rabbinic tradition that can also help us remember animal families and put them back into our conversations. Okay, so here's the plan. I want to first study together a little bit these 4 animal family laws in the Torah. I'm going to discuss with you one of the main explanations that's been given for them. I call it the humanitarian explanation. I want to talk about what that is, some criticisms of it, and then I want to explore with you a couple different approaches within the ancient rabbinic work, the Mishnah, on how the Mishnah understood animal families. And we'll look at a couple different lines of interpretation. And then I want to talk with you a little bit. I'm not a scientist, but I've dipped into the science. So I want to talk with you, present to you some of the science around animal kinship relationships, and then end with how the biblical laws and rabbinic tradition about animal families can inspire us today. Okay, so let's start with the basics. There are 4 laws in the Torah that feature the parent-child bond among animals. I call these the animal family laws. They're the most well-known. I'm curious for the people here, like you starting to think, wait, what are they? And probably the one that comes to mind most quickly is, you shall not boil a kid in his mother's milk. This occurs 3 times in the Torah in identical formulation. A second law is a requirement to leave an infant animal with a mother for the first week of life. And this law appears twice in different places in somewhat different formulations. A third animal family law is a prohibition against slaughtering an animal parent and child on the same day. That law appears only once, as does the law in Deuteronomy for sending off the mother bird before taking her eggs or chicks from the nest. So these 4 laws, as you just saw, they're scattered throughout the Torah. They appear in all these different places. But since antiquity, readers of the Torah have recognized a connection between these laws. So if we think about it, let's consider, what exactly do these 4 laws have in common? And you'll notice that none of these laws, sometimes laws in the Torah have reasons attached to them. None of these laws do. The closest we get is that law for sending off the mother bird has a reward attached to it. So that's an incentive, but it's not really a reason. So I wanted to use the chat, if I could, to get your take. What comes to mind? What do you see in common in these laws? What strikes you as an explanation that seems compelling for these laws? So I'm just going to look in the chat, see if anybody puts in their ideas. Yeah, they're all about parents and children. Compassion. I really want to focus on that compassion. Yeah, compassion. It's a really strong theme. I'm actually, that's the next thing I want to talk about. Anybody else want to slip in an answer? They do. I want to talk about animal emotions, empathy, similar to compassion, but I think has a slightly different set of associations. Relationships between animals and families matter, must be respected. Yeah, I want to really drill down into that idea of what does it mean to respect the animal family. Okay, I'm sure there are more ideas about that because these are rich laws and there's a lot to think about with respect to them. What I want to do is present to you the dominant approach that's been taken to these laws. And that approach is I call it, and because a lot of other people have called it, the humanitarian rationale. And the oldest and most complete formulation of the humanitarian rationale comes from an essay written by the 1st century CE Jewish philosopher Philo, who lived in Egypt. And he's writing in an essay called On the Virtues. And he has a very specific agenda in this essay where he's trying to combat anti-Semitic stereotypes of his day. Anti-Semitism is on a lot of our minds today. It was on Philo's mind back in the 1st century. And the stereotype then is that Jews are misanthropes, they're selfish, they're xenophobic, they care only about themselves. Philo thought these 4 laws were actually good counter evidence to that stereotype. And this was his thinking, is that if he could show that Jewish scripture expressed kindness or compassion towards animals, then surely kind of kal v'chomer, all the much more so, must Jewish scripture really care about those virtues. And this was typical Stoic philosophy of his day. If you've ever studied how did the ancients think about animals, the kind of classic Stoic approach was that animals are lacking in reason, and therefore we have no moral obligations towards animals. So Philo is actually of that persuasion. So he denounces the gluttony and savagery he sees in the practices that the Torah prohibits. And he describes that there's an incongruous mixing of life with death. And then I want to show you, there's one passage I think is particularly vivid, where he conjures up this unnerving image. So going to show you a quotation from that. Here is Philo speaking. Indeed, and he's writing, this is in Greek and translated into English. It's an outdated translation. You'll get that sense. If one should mix the limbs of the two, the mother and child animal, and fix them on the spits to eat of the roast, these limbs, I think, would not remain mute, but break out into speech, indignant at the enormity of the unexampled treatment which they suffer, and hurl a host of invectives against the greediness of those who prepare these meats, fitter for a feast than for a, this is hard to say, fitter for a fast than for a feast. So what's happening here is the mother and child animals are talking back to the person who's trying to barbecue them together. And I think it's interesting that the animals aren't actually really objecting to their slaughter, but rather the disregard for their intimate relationship with each other. Now, I think it's a shame that Philo became more popular with Christians than with Jews. But Church Father Clement of Alexandria was a big fan of Philo's, was heavily influenced by him, took his approach to these animal family laws, and then Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Luther, Calvin, all drew upon Clement. So the humanitarian approach to these laws really became the main Christian perspective on this biblical material. Now, the humanitarian rationale was less normative in Jewish traditions because the Mishnah really kind of mostly ignored it, though that's kind of a subject for another day. But the humanitarian approach did stay pretty strong amongst medieval and modern Jewish Bible commentators, as we're about to see, because the humanitarian rationale has also been criticized. And here I want to go back to the chat, and I'll be interested later to explore the chat more. But what problems do you see with the humanitarian rationale, with this idea that this is about compassion for animals or empathy for animals? I'm not seeing any responses. Anybody want to give this a shot? What seems a little weird about the humanitarian rationale? Okay, I see a couple messages. Anthropomorphic projection, agree. You're still eating them. Yes, thank you. Exactly. The slaughter is not stopped. Actually, Maimonides is going to say something very similar. It leaves decision-making and action to our emotions. Interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a one-way street. Anybody else want to jump in? Killing is fine as long as details are followed. Yeah. Okay. Certainly, because the project I've been working on these laws was really motivated by my own dissatisfaction with this explanation for some of the reasons that you just put into the chat. And here is Bible scholar Jacob Milgram, who kind of puts it all together, and I think formulates really helpfully the problems with the humanitarian theory. So here's what he says. The main argument against the humanitarian theory challenges its very use as the rationale for the kid law and the other cited animal prohibitions. It may be true that one may slaughter the dam and its young on the same day, but it surely is permitted on successive days. The newborn must be permitted to suckle for 7 days, but on the 8th day, it may be brought to the altar, even though it is still suckling. The mother bird and her fledglings or eggs may not be taken together, but surely they may be taken separately. By the same token, the mother goat can in no way be aware that her kid is boiling in her milk. And then here he concludes, the humanitarian theory must give way to another. So Jacob Milgram, I think, really gets at the problem. Does cooking a young goat in water or oil, does it really make the end of that animal's life any less untimely than if he's cooked in the milk of his mother, or any less of a loss to his mother? Does a lamb whose mother, where the ewe is removed on day 8, do they suffer any less than on day 7 if that removal happens? It just doesn't make that much sense to see compassion as the motivation for these laws or humanitarianism when you kind of draw out the implications. And Maimonides put the problem really succinctly in his commentary on the Mishnah. He says, these commandments are a scriptural decree. Oh, sorry, I didn't think to turn off my landline. That will hopefully stop shortly. Spam, of course. Sorry about this. Interrupting Maimonides, no less. Yeah, you know what? I'm really sorry. I'm going to get up and turn that off. So back to Maimonides. These commandments are a scriptural decree and not to be explained by way of compassion. For if they were on account of compassion, God would not have permitted slaughter to us whatsoever, which someone in the chat made that point. And I'll put the problem in my own words. If compassion is the rationale for these laws, then it kind of feels like an empty performance, or even hypocrisy, or even nonsense. Like there's a kind of nonsensical quality to it. Now, some have said the aim of these laws is not to help the animal, it's to inculcate virtue in humans. And that's kind of the thrust of Philo. It will later be the thrust of medieval Bible commentary Rashbam. But it seems a strange lesson in compassion if the recipient doesn't experience it in any way. So where does that leave us? The Bible is not really asking us to show compassion for animal families. I'm having phone problems here. It's safe to say that the Bible is concerned with animal families in some capacities. They matter in the Bible, even if the Bible isn't exactly protecting them. So maybe we can kind of sit there in a somewhat uncomfortable place with the Bible. But let's turn to the rabbis to see how they understood these laws. And I want to start with the prohibition on cooking a kid in his mother's milk. And we'll look together at this passage from the Mishnah. So this is from Tractate Chulin. It's chapter 8, and it's the first Mishnah. It is forbidden to cook any flesh with milk, with the exception of the flesh of fish and grasshoppers, and it is forbidden to bring it up on the table with cheese, with the exception of the flesh of fish and grasshoppers. So this is kind of spinning out the law of do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. And I sometimes teach this materials to students and make it like a little game, like figure out 3 ways that this Mishnah is extending the biblical prohibition on not cooking a kid in his mother's milk. So you can put that into the chat. We'll see. It covers any milk. Good. That's kind of going to be the thing I focus on the most. But let's keep it going. So it's, yeah. Anybody else? Any milk with any meat. Exactly. It extends to products made with milk. So we have the cheese. It goes beyond, well, it does say the exception of fish and grasshoppers, but a big question is going to be, what do we do with non-mammals? Yes, together on the table. Good. So it's not just cooking, it's putting together on the table. I think it looks like there's other interesting things, but I'm going to stop here. So what I wanted to focus on is that it goes from cooking to putting on the same table. It goes from a goat, it even has a specific mammal species, to meat in general. We have this abstract term, basar. And then from an animal with its own parent's milk to an animal with any milk. So the Mishnah, as you won't be surprised if you know anything about kashrut, because this is the basis for a good deal of kashrut, is it's creating this general prohibition on mixing dairy with mixing milk. Mixing meat with milk. So the Talmud and later rabbinic authorities add many other restrictions. They talk about fowl, that comes up already in the Mishnah. Even though birds don't produce milk, are they still included as meat? The question of waiting between eating meat and milk is debated. Do you have to wait at all? Can you just clean your mouth in between? We get medieval rabbis producing lots of different traditions. Maimonides legislates 6 hours between. Dutch Jews develop a tradition of 1 hour, German Jews 3 hours, conservative Jews follow that. Reform Jews, for the most part, kind of dispense with a lot of these earlier laws. We eventually get the idea of, they start asking what happens when things mix accidentally, how does that get handled? So we get the idea that if something takes on the taste of the other thing, it's a problem. And it extends to the vessel in which it's being cooked, and so on and so forth, till by the 18th century, we do start to get this like very systematic separation of meat utensils and milk utensils. First, actually, as a popular development, and then the rabbis in this case are kind of the ones who follow the will of the people, until we get, totally separate kitchens, separate dishwashers. So what I really want to point out here is what got lost along the way, which is that don't cook a kid in his mother's milk is about a mother and her child. But as we make this separation between milk and meat more and more systematic, you forget more and more what this law was originally actually about. It's not about this particular mother-child pair and their relationship, but it's about these abstract categories of milk and meat that actually really don't have anything to do with a mother-child pair. So we've kind of inherited this system of laws that forgot the original inspiration for them. So one of the central food ways for Jews, this division between milk and meat, is concerned with animal families and its origins, but very few people, I think, are really aware of that. But here's where I want to talk about other rabbinic streams of thinking that are doing something different. So it's just that the other streams, I think, are not as well known. And that's why I think it's really helpful to kind of learn different texts about these laws. So I'm going to give you an example. And this one is from the Mishnah's treatment of the prohibition against slaughtering an animal, parent, and child on the same day. So this is also actually from the same tractate, from Chulin. And here's the Mishnah. At 4 times of the year, one who sells an animal to his fellow must announce, I sold her mother for slaughter. I sold her daughter for slaughter. And these times are the eve of the final festival day of Sukkot, the eve of the first festival day of Passover, the eve of Atzeret, Shavuot, and the eve of Rosh Hashanah. And according to Yossi Aglili, also the eve of Yom Kippur in Galilee. So the Mishnah here requires 4 times a year, where anyone who's selling an animal has to make this announcement that if they had sold also that animal's mother or child. So here, I'll go to the chat just briefly again. Why? Why at these times of the year do these announcements need to be made? Whoops. Here. Oh, give a hint. Okay, so why would it be that at these times of the year, what's going on at these times of the year that you would want, that somebody would want to know if the mother, remember the prohibit, yes, good. Gila, Kane, you win today's prize. There's a higher chance both would be killed on the same day for sacrifice or for a meal. Yeah, so I'm gonna close the chat for a minute. Exactly. These are the time, remember, people in the past didn't eat, they didn't go to the supermarket and buy packages of meat. They did not eat animals as often as we do. They saved them for the times when they had a big feast with lots of people eating. And these were the times of grand feasting, right before the final day of Sukkot, the Chag, right before the Seder, right before Shavuot, right before Rosh Hashanah. For the Galilee, they must have really done it up right before Yom Kippur too. Those are the times people are having their big meals of the year. So these are the times where you have the greatest chance that buyer 1 of a mother and buyer 2 of the daughter will both be sacrificing those animals or slaughtering those animals on the same day, and therefore violating this explicit biblical prohibition on slaughtering a parent and child on the same day. So this announcement is meant to mitigate that risk and make sure that's not what happened. So I want to think about the implications. I find this really interesting. The Mishnah presents here this like first person script for the seller's announcement that's bringing attention to the animal's family relationships using the same language we use for people's relationships. Mothers and daughters is what they focus on here. There's another early rabbinic work, the Sifra, which is a commentary on Leviticus, that actually says there should be a public crier, a karuz, who makes these announcements on that day. So it's almost like a ceremonial quality to this announcement of animal family relationships. So obviously, I'm not arguing this Mishnah represents some kind of vegetarian manifesto. The animals are being sold for slaughter. But if you think about what this would mean, it means that people had to know who an animal's parents and children were. They had to keep track of animals' family trees if they were going to avoid violating this law. So why do I think this is important? I think locating animals within their family trees, knowing who their mothers were, knowing who their daughters were, really changes relationships and the way we think about people. And I'm going to just shift gears completely for a minute to illustrate and make my case, which is to the human world right here, right now. Does anyone remember the first subject Kamala Harris brought up in her speech introducing herself to the American public as the presidential nominee at the DNC? What was the first thing she talked about in her speech? I was struck by this. Her mother. Yep, exactly. She talked about Kamala Harris, and she told the story of her mother. Now, why did she start telling her own story, telling the story of her mother? I think it's the way a lot of us tell stories. It's a way to connect with other people. It's a way we define ourselves as individuals. I think like we're mammals, and for mammals, mothers matter. It's like an essential biological fact, but do not get me wrong. The role does not have to be biological. And I'll go back to Kamala Harris to make my point. Stick with that example. What do Kamala Harris's stepchildren call her? Which I love this. Yeah, Mamala Harris. She's their Mamala. So much as J.D. Vance may think otherwise, stepmothers are mothers too. Biology isn't necessary for motherhood, and it's not sufficient either. You can be a biological mother and not be much of a mother. You can be an adoptive mother and really be a mother. And you don't have to be a woman. You just have to be a central caregiving figure. That's really what we're talking about here. Now, you might object, and here's where I'm turning to the science, and I want to start reaching conclusions. Okay, so that's humans. Animals maybe don't have the same family relationships that we do. Do they feel love for their family relationships? How do we know they even have feelings? How do we know they can recognize their parents and children? So I want to turn from religion and law and politics to science, because there's a lot of science on this, really interesting science, which shows animals have emotions. I think for people who have animal companions or pay attention at all, it's kind of shocking you have to prove that, but there has been actually, I want to talk about why that needed to be proved. But animals do recognize their kin. They do develop bonds with their kin, and they do suffer harm when those bonds are broken. So just talking about those dimensions of animal life super briefly, I'll start with emotions. The fact is, this is still an active discourse. If you ask a lot of people, why does an animal do this behavior or do that behavior? And I'm going to stop going to the chat just because I want to have time for free-flowing questions. But what is the thing that people will say for why animals do X or Y? The big thing that gets said is instinct. And that really goes back to the philosopher Descartes, who described animals as, in French, bêtes machines, beast machines that are driven by instinct, kind of like automatons. And the claim was animals operate totally differently from the way humans operate. Now, Darwin obviously didn't agree, and he was actually particularly interested in emotions. He was studying both emotions in animals and humans, and ended up writing so much about it. He was going to just include it in The Descent of Man, but then wrote a whole other book on the subject, which became a bestseller in 1872. Despite Darwin's enthusiasm, the idea of animal emotions actually became unpopular among behavioral scientists, but then the idea kind of surfaced again. There's like history of the science that I'm following here. It surfaced again in the 60s and 70s. And kind of since then, for especially, it was slower in America than in Europe, but it's become a big area of scientific research for a while now. In the meantime, evolutionary biologists were really doing a lot of work on what they call kin recognition, how animals recognize their kin in order to provide advantages to them, not mate with them, not harm them. So there's really a lot of great information about how, especially animal mothers, recognize their children and vice versa. I mean, you'll see this also in human developmental psychology as well. There's a lot of interest, but there's lots of studies. Farmed Iberian red deer, they played recordings of hinds and calves to each other, and they reacted more strongly to each other than they did to others. Northern fur seal mothers and pups were able to routinely find each other in huge groups because of well-developed recognition systems. Mother sheep and goats bond mainly on the basis of smell. And I wanted to give you an example, a little video. I promise you there's a happy ending to our video, but I do just want to make the point that it's not just mammals, it's cockroaches. And think about that next time you've got a cockroach in your house, which, by the way, I don't love either. But they have found mother-offspring recognition in fish, bats, monkeys, cats, cattle. Here, we'll watch. You'll see it here in action.
Up in the high elevation, these snow-free days won't last long. So while mothers are busy feeding, kids are getting to know their extended family. While playing an endless game of King of the Hill, learning skills that will prepare them for life in a vertical world. Soon, mothers hurry to collect their kids as the herd continues to move. But amidst the excitement, one kid has lost track of his mom. He calls to her, but no reply. And he can't see or smell her anywhere. All the goats are rapidly shedding their winter coats, so Mom looks different from day to day. The only way to find out is to get close enough to smell. One by one, he's rejected. Nobody seems to want him around. The sun is beginning to set, and the kid is growing increasingly anxious. In a last-ditch effort, he chases after a lone nanny walking away. When he reaches her, he sniffs cautiously, having made so many wrong guesses already. This time, he guessed right. As twilight descends over the mountain, the two bed down together on a nearby cliff. The kid is overjoyed to have his mother back. On this mountain, their bond is everything.
Okay, a little cheesy, but kind of fun to watch. So not only you see here the role of smell in, I think the mom, like, why didn't the mom, you know, far be it from me to criticize other mothers, but I feel like she could have helped him out a little bit there. So not only do animals recognize their kin, they also clearly get very attached to them. The mother-infant bond has many different features across mammals, across other species too. I'm thinking I might skip a little bit here to talk about some of those features. I'll just mention what happens when an animal mother is separated from her child. You see here just a few snippets of the research. There's a lot of research on this. The bond between the mother and infant is compared by scientists who study it, Ruth Newberry and Jenna Swanson, with addiction, and separation between the mother and infant they compared to withdrawal symptoms. There's a frenetic desperation that the mother and child experience when they're separated. And they display lots of different distress responses. Their feeding and sleep patterns are altered. They stop playing. They have elevated corticosteroid levels, changes in heart rate, core body temperature. It's like really visceral stuff. Increased frequent high-pitched vocalizations, potentially injurious escape attempts to try to reunite. Worst reproductive success is linked with the stress of forced weaning, higher mortality rates, greater incidence of disease. So that's why there's so much research on it, because it really affects the well-being of animals and also decreases productivity of animals in animal agriculture. And that's what I want to turn to now, is the realities of animal families in animal agriculture today. And I was really surprised to find out when I was doing my research on this, how much worse the dairy industry is actually to the meat industry. Dairy cattle farms, both conventional and organic, they separate the cow and calf really quickly. It's within a few hours of birth. They take the mother to her stall, and then they take the calf to be alone or with groups with other calves. And usually the male dairy calves, they just kill right away because there's really no profit in them. And I think there's only one country that prohibits that. I think it's Germany. In the meat industry, the separation is somewhat later, though still before the animals would naturally wean. For sheep and goats, it's similar. I was just talking about cows. In the dairy industry for sheep, the newborns are separated within a day or 2 days. For goats, it's immediate. There's no suckling whatsoever. Now, the main reason is, of course, profitability. You can get more milk this way. You can hasten the reproductive cycle this way, so you get more babies faster. There's lots of other research on this and reasons cited that if you allow infants and mothers to bond, the infants will be harder to handle as they get older. There's research that gets cited that artificial rearing systems reduce risk of infection, that they control the colostrum better, that if you delay the separation, it's just going to make it harder for the mother and child. But the research has actually disproven a lot of these rationales for early separation. And the fact is, even, and this is something I've thought a lot about, even the best case scenario does involve, we're going to see an ancient image actually that illustrates this, does involve separating the mother and child, because if we're going to take the milk, we have to be separating the child so that we can interfere. So here's the thing, and I am sort of getting to my close here. Most people really don't know. When people are told, they don't like it. Most people, I think, care. And there's actually research on this. A Canadian researcher found, sampling 1,500 Americans, 300 Canadians, that people want systems that don't have to separate calves and cows. And they considered the separation a breach of care. People were concerned. They thought it seemed unnatural. One of the participants said it's cruel to take a baby away from their mother, regardless of human or animal. Some people in the study said it changed the choices they made about milk consumption. A similar study in America by an animal welfare specialist she concluded that, and I'm quoting her, the idea of severing the bond provoked strong reactions, in part because the cow-calf bond was seen as similar to the human mother-child relationship. So I think it's really not that people don't care, it's that they don't know, and that we're so removed from animal agriculture that we don't think about and don't know about what's happening to animal families. And I think this is where we can really learn from people of the past, from Jews of the past, from the Bible, from the rabbis. I think they understood the toll that animal domestication took on animals. They knew what happened to animal families. It bothered them. That's why we have those laws in the Torah. The Bible knew it. Other ancient people knew it. And I want to show you, actually, kind of branching out from Jewish traditions, that this concern with animal mothers and children, it goes back really far. This is from the 21st century BCE. It's an image from a relief decoration on the sarcophagus of a princess, Kawit, who was from the Middle Kingdom. You can see this sarcophagus yourself if you go to Egypt in the museum in Cairo. And most of the images are of her luxuriating in her palace life and being attended by maids and having her hair styled and such things. But there's one image you can see here, it should be on your left side, that depicts a milking scene. So on the left, you've got a horned cow. So hopefully you can follow along with me. A horned cow with a small calf next to it. And then next to that, a second large cow. This one doesn't have horns, also accompanied by a small calf. So I want to zoom in on that right-hand half of the image. So what's happening in this image? This cow, the second one, is being milked by a kneeling human figure who with both hands is squeezing milk from the udder into a pouch that's suspended with straps. This calf, presumably the cow's child, has been tied to the cow's front leg with a rope so that the person taking the milk can do so. And what I'm sure you notice is a very dramatic feature of this tableau is this single tear that's dropping from the cow's eye in this situation. And I like to think of this image as almost a form of ancient vegan art, that it feels like if it's not a critique of domestication and milking, it's at least sort of working out the drama of it and the emotions involved in it for the animals who are involved. So in this image, it's not kind of one I managed to unearth. It was actually a stock image in antiquity. You have images like this from ancient Egypt, Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia. They were really interested in animal maternity. Animal mothers were a motif in lots of different settings, showing them nursing their own animal children, being milked by people while their children stand by, even nursing humans who are shown suckling straight from the animal's udder. And so you see this motif like across time in Hellenistic mosaics, early Christian frescoes, medieval illuminated manuscripts. If someone's familiar with Eastern traditions, you'll find countless depictions of the Hindu god Krishna in this vein. Here you can see a Chagall painting with a similar image, a nursing calf next to a nursing child, and there's a farmer's wife floating in the air, and this is his surrealist masterpiece, To Russia, Asses, and Others. So I'm going to draw to a close with a bit of philosophy from feminist animal activist Carol Adams. Now, she writes about our relationship to animals. She introduces this idea of the absent referent, and this is how she puts it. It's the literal being who disappears in the eating of dead bodies. The absent referent functions to put the violence under wraps. There's no cow whom we have to think about. So what she's trying to say is in order to be able to eat animals, we have to not think about the animal. And I'm really trying to add the idea we also have to not think about the animal's family. Once you start to think about the animal's mother, their father, their children, their grandchildren, I think it becomes harder. It's something we have to reckon with more, to take the milk, to take the eggs, to take the body. And there's really a feminist. Sometimes people will ask me, like, I'm vegan, why are you vegan? I'll say, because I'm a feminist. Because what we're doing is we're using female bodies to produce eggs and milk for us. It's kind of like a matter of, you know, what's your relationship to the female body? So the Torah took note of animal families. The Mishnah took note of animal families. I think we can take note of them too. And I think that a lot can happen when we do. There's a lot of, I want to show one last video, I'll end with it. But before that, I just want to talk about some of the ethical stakes here of recognizing animal families, obviously choices around eating animals, you know, thinking about what we buy. Is there animal experimentation involved? Choices around human development that breaks up animal families, voting for politicians who are going to try to protect the environment. I think we could just, you know, keep thinking of ways to do this. But the reason I want to end with the following here, I'm going to stop my share and go to a different video because it's on my a different screen. Let's see if I can get it up. Oh, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Here's what I wanted to end with, is that a lot of times when we talk about animals, it's a real downer. And we're talking about tragedy and trauma, and there is a lot of that. But I think there's a lot of joy too. There's a lot of pleasure we can get from thinking about animal families, not just thinking about all the animal families that are separated from each other, but also the joy of animal families and the beauty we can find in them. And I think this video from a New York Times reporter having to do with bats really captures the way through our encounter with animal families we can experience so much pleasure, joy, and connection. So I'm going to wrap up here, then we'll have hopefully a little time for Q&A. And this is my wrap up. So here we go.
Them for spreading
Here,
disease.
start.
Bats. They have kind of a bad reputation. We blame them for spreading diseases. We put them in haunted houses to scare children. We associate them with vampires. Bats have some bad PR. So we went to Mexico and to the Yucatan Peninsula with one of the world's greatest bat experts, this man named Rodrigo Medellin. Rodrigo was passionate about the fact that bats are wonderful. They pollinate plants for us. They kind of keep the forest running like it should. And he said,
"You are not going to run away from bats after we're done in this trip." Okay.
He took us right away out into the jungle to this place called El Hormiguero, which is a Maya ruin. And Rodrigo led us around the side of it to this open black hole. He and a couple of his students just put on headlamps and went in there with their giant nets. They come out and they're holding these bags, and one by one Rodrigo's pulling these bats out of the bags, and they're just fighting him so hard he's screaming,
"Don't bite me, don't bite me."
but he's just delighted at the same time. And then he reaches into one particular bag and he pulls out one of the cutest things I've ever seen, a baby bat. He actually flips it over and you can see milk in its stomach that it's been nursing from its mother. And it was just this moment where the switch flipped, and I was like, this bat is adorable. I love this bat. On our last night together, we had to go to this place called the Bat Volcano.
Like 30 meters long, 6 meters high.
Something like 3 million bats comes out every single night, and they shoot out of that hole and they start swirling around this canyon, and then they just go firing right past you into the forest to hunt for the night. I thought I would scream and run away, but it really felt like a release of a lot of fear. And I guess it just sort of puts you in your place.
Thanks so much. So I'd like to open up the conversation. I guess the idea is for me to look at the questions in the chat.
Right. So Beth, there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Do you actually, Jonathan, I don't know if you're up for this. Would you mind maybe posing the question to me and tell me, and then, attributing it to the person who asked it? Okay.
That's what I was just about to suggest. And also, as I'm doing that, I just want to remind folks, in terms of the questions themselves, a couple of things to kind of keep in mind. It's always good. First, we're really going to encourage people to actually ask questions about, the presentation itself, about animal families, because we really want to kind of take that idea and really kind of be able to delve deeper into it. And I do just want to remind people, as I'm reading the questions off of the chat, that questions end with a question mark and are generally a little bit on the shorter side. So just putting that out there for people to consider as they're writing their questions in. And we do have a number of them. So to begin, gosh, there's a lot of questions. So the first one comes from Leah. What is the Jewish source that says vegetarianism is the ideal and kashrut is a concession?
I mean, what comes to mind for me is Genesis 9 and the episode after the flood when God makes his covenant with Noah and all creatures, and permits. I mean, this, I would love to, be able to have a conversation about the text and take it out, but permits the eating of animals and says there will be the dread and fear of humans on animals. And I think the question there is this supposed to be a fallen world? And that's how I read that episode within the primeval history, that vegetarianism, veganism, it's really veganism is kind of the state of paradise. And then the eating of animals represents a fall from grace. And then I think kashrut is kind of another later piece. And that's, that's kind of its own question, I guess. I don't think of kashrut. I think the eating of animals is presented that way. I don't think kashrut is represented in the Torah as a concession.
Right. Yes, very, very much so. Very much so. So sort of building on that sort of understanding that we see even within Jewish tradition, how our dietary habits evolve. What have you found has been sort of the response from audiences that when you've shared this kind of framing, when you sort of shared an awareness of animals that's drawing us deeper into their world and therefore becoming more sensitive to it with the implications of that? Have you found people to be open to that, closed to that? Have you done this? I'm curious, the question here in the chat also asks in terms of how different audiences have responded to it. So, from Jewish audiences that are less friendly than this audience, do you get a different response or a different vibe?
Yeah, one of the reasons I was excited to do this session today is that it was in a Jewish context with people who are sort of more activist oriented and care about these issues in a very applied way. And I've done a lot of presenting of the material, but in scholarly settings. So I think people are intellectually interested in these laws and the issues they raise. But in terms of kind of more communal settings and like lay settings, I'm really excited to actually find out. Like, I have definitely had a few people who I've mentioned this to, like just friends or somebody asked me what I'm working on. I do think this angle is something people don't think about a lot. Like my sense is the most common kind of go-to issue is the suffering of animals in being killed, and then in the living conditions in factory farms. And I think the particular issue of what does this do to their intimate relationships? How are we interfering with animal? And also the thing I ended with Carol Adams, like the feminist angle. What does this mean for how we're using animal female bodies? I mean, Carol Adams has been talking about it for years, but I don't think there's enough conversation along those lines. Like if you really care about women's bodies, it's a little weird to not care about the female bodies in other species.
So picking up on that, because there's a number of questions. They're different questions, but they all sort of share the same sort of thread, which is, why aren't people more aware of this dynamic, particularly the family framing that you're giving it, and the kind of suffering that then comes along with it? Because there is a part, I think the underlying the question is this idea, like, it was almost part of how you said, like, shouldn't it be kind of obvious that there are bonds here? Like why do we need to be told this, and why are we so clueless about it, and not showing that kind of sensitivity in terms of how we go forward and how we treat other species?
Yeah, I bet there are people here who know more about this up close than I do. And I don't mean to sound really like a crazy paranoid person, but I think the animal industry is trying to get us to not realize it. Like, I think they're invested in having people not realize it and not know about it, and, not be thinking about it. Because I talked about the research. When people think about it and hear about it, it bothers them. People don't like I think people connect. I mean, I watch videos all the time on Instagram of like really, really heart-melting animal relationships with each other. These like intimate animal relationships, they're so beautiful. And I think if you see that, then it's hard to block it out. And I think there are real forces out there that want us to block it out and that make it hard for us. Like, I actually was just in a Starbucks yesterday, and paying more for the oat milk option or something. Like, I think there's profit margins involved that are there's a lot of reasons I think that we don't notice it, and it's not, we don't come across these factories. They're hidden from us. They're actively hidden from us. And when people try to, they get arrested for trespassing on, in the places where this is happening. So I think it's like an active concealing from the public.
Okay. And this may end up being our last question, or our second to last question, because we do have really quite a number, and I'm trying to kind of take them and conflate them into, kind of combine them a little bit. But we've had a number of questions regarding the use of the word in English, dominion over, starting in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. When it says, let us create Adam b'tselem, in our image, b'tselmenu, in our image, and let them have dominion, or however one wants to translate that word. So there are a number of different questions about that sort of. Is that the correct translation of the word? If so, what is the nuance of the word? And there's another one in terms of, is this sort of a before or after the fall kind of thing? And how does this affect, sort of our own self-conception? So I was just wondering, like, if you could address some of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so I saw quickly in the chat, someone made a really good point that I've spent a lot of time thinking about, which is that people in antiquity knew this stuff and still ate animals and still did this. So, is it so bad to interfere? And I think that's a really important point too. But in terms of dominion, I just was reading a book by a Bible scholar at Brown named Saul Olian, who wrote a book called Animal Rights in the Hebrew Bible. It's really great. I recommend it. And one of, I think, the takeaway points from his book is that the Bible is an anthology. There are different perspectives there. Dominion is there. I'm not going to whitewash dominion, but it's not the only perspective. And actually, Saul Olean makes the case about that particular passage, that was probably a late addition, and the earlier version of the story did not have that particular formulation. So I think we really need to read the Bible in sophisticated ways. Like we have to learn how to read the Bible better, I think, for when we're discussing it with respect to animals or any other issue. And I wanted to address the comment in the chat, like, well, people knew this. They knew that mothers and children needed to be separated in order to get the milk in antiquity, and they still did it. And I think that's really valuable, because I think sometimes veganism or not wanting to use animals for various purposes can take on this utopian quality, and you can try to become like some kind of animal saint, and it's just not realistic. And sometimes I get into that mode of like, well, I don't want to harm an animal in any way whatsoever, and it's just not possible, because even growing crops, like insects end up getting killed. Like there's just so many ways we inflict harm in the world. We just do. Every creature does. So I don't think any of us should try to be perfect, but I think it's about noticing the harm that we do and doing what we can, like kind of respecting that we inflict harm, try to minimize it, find ways to do the best we can. And I think we're not doing that now. Like we can do better when it comes to animal families. I don't think I maybe said this at the end, but I meant to. I don't think we're going to make every animal family happy, just like we're not going to make every human family happy. But I think we can do our best to make as many families happy, both human and animal, as we can.
And on that note, I think those are beautiful words to be able to bring our time together to a close. Though I do want to just point out, there's still lots of questions that we haven't gotten to. So just in terms of kind of thought-provoking and so forth, I hope you get a chance also just to see the amazing, lovely comments in terms of the presentation as well. And I want to thank you so much for a really fascinating presentation and a wonderful perspective. I have to say, as a rabbi and as a rabbinic student who, when I was at the seminary, studied those exact commentaries that said all of those things that you said don't make any sense. It's amazing how much, if you work hard enough, you can make things make sense. And it's I'm deeply appreciative, as I hope everyone, and I'm assuming everyone here is as well, for your really bringing a different frame to it and a different way of really opening up these texts and this way of approaching both the other animals with whom we share this world in a way that is more sensitive and reflective of our tradition, as well as how to go forward in terms of treating other animals in this world and understanding how much we share and how much we really are all just part of this earth together. So thank you so very much for a wonderful lecture and just wonderful ideas and wonderful challenges for us to kind of consider as we go forward. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much too. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. So my friends, this concludes our time together. After this, you should be redirected to follow up our survey, and we very much appreciate that feedback. Cannot tell you how important it is to us. We want to thank our honoree, Richard, and to you, Beth, as well, for, as I said, a wonderful presentation. And thanks again also to our captioners, Sarah and Rocky. We appreciate all of you joining us today, and thank you to those who made the suggested donation. And we welcome any gifts that you should wish to make in Richard's honor and Aleph Be'elul to support our work at CJFE. All donations can be made on our new website, jewishfoodethics.org. Again, thank you for supporting our work. We want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach. May you have a meaningful rest of this Jewish New Year for animals, and may it be a more compassionate and peaceful year ahead for all of us as we go forward into the new year. May we be a source of blessing and a vehicle of holiness to make an impact and make ours a better world. We all say Amen And thank you all so very, very much.